there is a version of you that no one has ever fully met, not because you are secretive, not because you are cold, but because somewhere along the way, you learned that being too much, knowing too much, seeing too much was dangerous. Not in a physical sense, but dangerous in the quieter, more corrosive way. The way that cost you belonging, the way that cost you love. So you tucked yourself in, folded the sharper edges of your mind into something softer, something easier, something smaller, and you got very, very good at it. This is not a video about intelligence as a gift. It is not a list of signs that you are secretly a genius. It is something much more tender than that. It is about why the smartest people in any room are often the quietest ones, and not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned, usually the hard way, exactly what happens when they do. If any part of you has ever held back a thought because you were not sure how it would land, if you have ever laughed off an insight because the room did not seem ready for it, if you have ever pretended not to notice something you absolutely noticed, then stay with this for a while, because this is for you. You already know you do it. That is the thing. You are aware of it in real time, this little internal edit, this split-second calculation that happens before you speak. Someone says something at the dinner table, and you already see 3 layers underneath it. You see the contradiction in the argument, the unspoken fear driving the opinion, the pattern beneath the pattern, but you pause. You weigh the room, and then you say something softer, or nothing at all. It is not that you cannot find the words. You have always been able to find the words. The problem is that you have learned somewhere between childhood and now that the right words in the wrong room can make people feel exposed. And when people feel exposed, they do not thank you. They pull away. They get quiet in a different way. Or worse, they push back, not with logic, but with something more personal, something that lands closer to home. So you learn to edit, to translate your actual thoughts into a more palatable version, to shrink the full frequency of what you see down to something the room can absorb without discomfort. You do it so automatically now that sometimes you do not even notice the original thought anymore. It passes through you like a flash, and then it is gone, replaced instantly by the safer version you have trained yourself to offer. And the strange thing is, you are often the most engaged person in the room. You are listening more carefully than anyone else. You are tracking subtext, noticing body language, holding the emotional thread of the conversation with a kind of invisible care that no one ever acknowledges. Because they do not know you are doing it, you do not let them know. Let that land for a second. You are doing more cognitive and emotional work than almost everyone around you, and you are doing it invisibly, on purpose, so that no one feels uncomfortable. There is a name for the pattern underneath this behavior. Psychologists who study social masking and identity concealment describe what happens when a person consistently hides their cognitive or emotional capabilities as a form of strategic self-diminishment. The technical framing is less important than what it feels like from the inside, and from the inside it feels like fluency, like you have become completely fluent in a second language, the language of smallness, the language of just enough, the language of I am not a threat. The roots of this are almost always relational, and almost always old. At some point, probably when you were young enough that you did not fully understand what was happening, you received a message. It was not always spoken out loud. Sometimes it came through tone, through the way a parent went quiet after you said something too perceptive, through the way a teacher became uncomfortable when you asked a question they could not answer, through the way a group of peers laughed, not with you, but at the earnestness of your curiosity, through the way someone you loved said, gently or not so gently, "You think you are so smart, do you?" And that sentence or something like it lodged somewhere deep, not as a memory you revisit consciously, but as a reflex, as a rule you wrote for yourself in invisible ink. Being visibly smart makes people feel bad, and when people feel bad, they leave, or they hurt you. So do not be visibly smart. This is where the psychology gets interesting and also a little heartbreaking. because the child who learned this rule was not wrong. They were reading their environment accurately. The suppression was adaptive. It was intelligent in its own way to figure out that visibility came with a cost, and invisibility came with safety. What saved you then made complete sense then. It was a reasonable response to an unreasonable dynamic. But here's the paradox that no one talks about. What saved you then imprisons you now, because you are no longer a child in that environment. But the rule did not expire when you left. It moved with you. It wired itself into the architecture of how you move through the world, how you make friends, how you date, how you show up at work, how you feel about your own mind on a quiet Tuesday night when no one else is around. The psychologists who study this call it a schema, a deep belief about how the world works that was formed early and updates very slowly, sometimes not at all, unless you go looking for it deliberately. The schema in its simplest form is this: my full self is too much. The world rewards me for being less than I am. So being less than I am is how I survive. And you have survived. You are very good at surviving. That is not nothing. But survival and living are two very different things. And somewhere, in the quietest part of you, you already know that. Here is where it gets more complicated. Because this pattern does not just affect how you speak. It shapes the entire texture of your relationships. Think about the people closest to you. Really think about it. How many of them know what you actually think? Not the edited version, not the diplomatic version, but the real and full version. The one with all its sharp clarity and all its uncomfortable conclusions. If you are honest, the number is probably very small. Maybe it is 0, and there is a loneliness in that. A specific kind of loneliness that is hard to name because from the outside, your life looks connected. You have friends, you have conversations, you laugh, but the part of you that is most alive, most awake, most brilliantly and achingly you, that part stays in the back room. You bring it out alone, at 2 a.m, in a journal no one reads, in a thought you have in the shower and then release into the drain before you step out. The consequence of this is not just loneliness, it is a slow erosion of self-trust. Because every time you edit yourself down, there is a small but real signal that goes to your nervous system. The signal says, your full self is not acceptable, and you cannot send that signal 1,000 times without it starting to feel like truth. You begin to doubt your own perceptions, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly. You have an insight, and before you can even finish forming it, a second voice arrives and says, "But are you sure? Who are you to see that? Maybe you are reading too much into it. Maybe you are being arrogant." And so the insight dissolves, and the second voice wins, not because it is right, but because it has been winning for so long that it has home field advantage. This is what the research on imposter syndrome, on self-silencing, on chronic self-concealment, all points toward. The more you hide, the more you believe the hiding is necessary. The self-concealment and the self-doubt feed each other in a loop that has no natural exit. You do not grow out of it by living your life quietly. You only deepen the groove. Pause here, just for a breath. Because if you have been sitting with this, if some part of you is recognizing itself in these words, that recognition is not comfortable. And it is not supposed to be. This is not the kind of video where we reach the halfway point and you feel better. This is the kind where you feel something more honest than better. You feel seen. And being seen when you have spent so long hiding feels less like relief and more like standing in a room where all the lights have just come on. Stay with that. Here is the thing that no one says. The thing that lives right at the center of this whole pattern. The quiet, painful truth underneath all the strategy and all the adaptation. You are not hiding your intelligence because you think it makes you superior. You are hiding it because you are afraid it makes you unlovable. That is it. That is the whole thing. Not arrogance in disguise. Not false modesty as a manipulation tactic. Not some calculated social strategy, though it has calcified into one. At the root of it, in the original wound, is a terrified and tender question that has never fully gone away. If you see all of me, will you still want to stay? And because you could not risk the answer, you made yourself smaller. You made yourself safer to be around. You made yourself someone who would not make others feel dim by comparison. You curated a version of yourself that was warm and accessible and easy, and you offered that version to the world with both hands, hoping it would be enough. It was enough to keep people around, but it was never enough to make you feel truly known. And there is a grief in that lives in the body, not as a thought, but as a heaviness that settles in the chest on certain evenings, in certain conversations, when you are surrounded by people who love the version of you they have met, but have never, not once, encountered the real thing. I used to think there was something wrong with me for seeing too much. Now I think the world was just not ready for how awake I was. So what do you do with all of this? Not fix it. That framing is wrong already. You do not fix a person. You do not correct an adaptation that was once your most elegant survival tool. You honor it first. You look at the child who figured out that hiding was safer, and you do not tell them they were wrong. You tell them they were brilliant. They read the room perfectly. They kept themselves intact using the only tools they had. And then slowly, with enormous gentleness, you begin to ask a different question. Not how do I stop hiding, but where might it feel safe enough to let one true thing through? The path forward is not a performance of boldness. It is not forcing yourself to speak more, or take up more space, or say all the sharp things you have been holding back. That is not liberation. That is just a different kind of performance. The real work is smaller and stranger and more intimate than that. It is the work of noticing in real time the split-second edit. Noticing it without immediately judging yourself for it. Just watching it happen. Being curious about it. Asking, with genuine interest and without accusation, why did I just do that? What did I think would happen if I let that thought land in the open air? This is what the inner work traditions sometimes call shadow work, and what attachment researchers might frame as earned security. It is the slow and non-linear process of discovering that the old rules, the ones you wrote in childhood, are negotiable, that the environments you live in now may not carry the same cost they once did, that there are people, not many, but some, who are not threatened by your full presence, who do not need you to be smaller to feel comfortable, who, in fact, are hungry for the real version of you because they are tired of surfaces too. Finding those people does not happen by declaring yourself open. It happens by allowing one small, true thing to exist in a conversation and watching what the other person does with it. By saying the unsanitized thought, just once, to someone who has already shown you they can be trusted with the complicated. By choosing, just once, not to rescue someone from the mild discomfort of being in the presence of a mind that works the way yours works. You do not have to go all in at once. You are not trying to become someone new. You are slowly, carefully, giving the original version of yourself permission to exist in more rooms than just the ones you enter alone. The hiding made sense. It always made sense. But you are older now. The world is bigger now than the room where the rule was written. There is a metaphor that keeps returning, and it is this. Imagine a body of water still on the surface, so still that people who look at it see only a mirror, and they love the mirror. They stand at the edge and see their own reflection and feel comfortable. But underneath the stillness there is movement, there is depth, there is an entire ecosystem of current and life and complexity that the mirror surface gives no sign of. And the water does not resent this, but it does remember what it is. You are not the mirror. You have never been the mirror. The mirror is what you learn to offer, so people would stay at the edge rather than wading in. But there is someone, somewhere, maybe closer than you think, who is not interested in the mirror, who would rather wade in, who is not afraid of depth, who would find the current exhilarating rather than threatening. And the strange thing is that you will not find them by continuing to offer the mirror. You will only find them when you let a little of the real thing rise to the surface, when you let one true thought exist in the open, when you say the thing you usually fold away, and you watch, with curiosity rather than fear, what happens next. This does not happen overnight. The nervous system that learned to hide has a long memory and a strong preference for familiar safety. There will be moments when you offer something real and it does not land the way you hoped. And every old instinct will say, "See, that is why we do not do this." And that will be hard. Let it be hard. That is not evidence that you were wrong to try. It is evidence that you are in the learning curve of a very new and very important skill. The skill of being yourself in the presence of other people. The most exhausting thing is not the work. It is pretending for years that less of me is easier to love. Come back to the image from the beginning. That room you are standing in with all the lights on, recognizing yourself in these words. You have been in that room your whole life. You have just been turning the dimmer down so no one would notice how much light was actually there. What if you turned it up just slightly? Not all the way. Just enough to see your own hands, because that is where this begins. Not in the big declaration, not in the dramatic moment of finally being seen by the world. It begins in the private recognition that you are worth knowing fully, that your mind is not a burden to be managed, that your depth is not a problem to be solved, that the version of you that sees the pattern beneath the pattern, that holds complexity without collapsing, that stays awake in conversations where everyone else has fallen asleep, that version is not too much. It was never too much. It was only ever in a room that was too small. There will be days when the old reflex returns, and you will fold yourself back down out of habit. That is allowed. That is human. You are not trying to become someone who never hides. You are trying to become someone who knows, even in the middle of hiding, that the hiding is a choice and not a truth. Hiding was the first language I learned, but it was never the only one I spoke. The grief of this is real. Give it its full weight. There is something genuinely sorrowful about all the years of editing, all the conversations where you were present but not whole, all the relationships built on a version of you that was carefully maintained but never fully alive. You do not need to minimize that or rush past it into some cleaner story about growth. The sorrow is part of the story. The sorrow is, in fact, evidence of how much you valued connection, how much you wanted to belong, how carefully you tried to make yourself someone people could stay close to. That was love in its way. Misguided and costly, but love. And love, even the kind that costs you, deserves to be acknowledged before it is asked to change. So sit with it for whatever time you need. Let yourself feel the full weight of what it has meant to carry your full self alone, quietly in the back rooms of your own mind for all these years. And when you are ready, not before, when you are genuinely ready, begin the slow and extraordinary work of letting yourself be known. Not to everyone, not all at once, but to someone, and someday in ways you cannot quite picture yet, to yourself most of all. Maybe I was never hiding. Maybe I was just waiting for a room that could hold me. The lights are already on. They were on the whole time.